closed here. I think we can leave it open.
I'd leave it just in case the security wasn't working, and that means the HVAC might also not be working. So it could get very
Yeah.
so we should probably leave it for now until we hear if the HVAC's running. Okay, I've started that.
All right. I think we're ready to get this party started, right? Meeting is called to order. We do have a quorum. Is there any public comment?
I have the usuals online. I do not have any new faces.
Okay. All right. I'll give a quick chair's update. First, do we have any volunteers to take the minutes?
I can take them.
Okay, thank you. I guess, did the video get posted for the April meeting? I didn't see. I didn't hear back from.
I haven't checked yet.
Yeah, I haven't taken a look.
The TV folks were working on it.
Working on it. Okay, so anyhow, great, appreciate it, Laura. Received.
Nice.
All right, I received word today that Kevin Robbins is resigning from the commission effective today. I thank him for his many years of service. That means we're back to 10. So 10 members. That means we need 6 for a quorum. Do my math, right? And that means we have 3 vacancies. So again, if you know of anybody qualified, interested, please have them apply. Talk to us. We'd be happy to talk to them about joining. And the final item on the chair's report, Holly Hartel, the Assistant CIO for Strategic Initiatives, reports that the Clarendon Safety and Innovation Zone, this is demonstration project, is closing out. The lights were to be removed from the poles last weekend, and they are completing the final reviews of the project summary report, and as soon as it is completed, it will be shared with us. So really, perhaps ask Holly to come join us to present at the time.
Yeah, she will.
Okay, good. And that brings us to item number 4. Melissa McMahon, Parking and Curb Space Manager, Arlington County Department of Environmental Services, here to talk to us about the parking pilot, performance parking pilot, the PPP. All right.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here. This is a fun project. I'm excited to be a participant in it, and I'm excited to share it with you all. My name is Melissa McMahon. I am a Parking and Curb Space Manager for Arlington County. I work in the Transportation and Engineering and Operations Bureau of the Division of Transportation. And tonight I'm going to present a short, hopefully a shortish presentation to you, followed by any of your questions. And I did receive a few in advance, so I hope to address some of those at the end before we go into follow-up. And hopefully throughout the presentation, some of those questions may also be answered. The Performance Parking Pilot Project in Commercial Corridors is a project that is funded by the Virginia Department of Transportation through their Innovation, Technology, and Transportation Fund. So we are very excited to partner with them on this, and excited to bring this pilot to Arlington. So I wanted to start out laying a groundwork for how staff understand this term performance parking, because it can mean a lot of things. It has been used in other jurisdictions for similar projects. In our instance, we define it in this sort of 4-part way. It is data-driven, so we are using technology to better understand existing parking utilization by applying a technology that can bring us better data. It is actively managed. So this is a methodology for helping us manage our parking supply to make parking more convenient and to reduce impacts of the negative impacts of hard to find parking. So this is a technology and data system that can allow us to make changes as we need. It is a tailored system, so customizable to neighborhoods and blocks based on their actual use. And it's flexible and responsive. So the purpose of this pilot is to see if we can create a system that allows us to change in accordance with the changing needs of the community. The policy foundation is actually in our master transportation plan, and that plan and the policy elements that make it up really date back to 2009, and yet it's still quite relevant. And this is actually our first opportunity to try to implement this piece of our master transportation plan, to utilize parking meter pricing strategies that vary by hour and location to better match parking availability and demand. So in terms of a purpose, we are aiming to make our metered parking spaces more available more often, and to share useful information about that availability and people's parking options in real time. And again, to reduce those negative impacts associated with the search for metered parking. So some examples of those include cruising for parking, double parking, and potentially even going somewhere else to do business. I want to also highlight right up front, this is a pilot project, meaning we are evaluating it to measure its effectiveness. And actually there is a formal, I'll call it third-party evaluation being done by VDOT for this. So there is a vendor that is not our vendor evaluating the effectiveness of our program based on the project's goals and the grant goals. And we are working with them to scope that evaluation, but not do it. So it's really nice to have that third-party partner over the course of this 3-year project. And if it doesn't work, we don't have to continue doing it. So that's really one of the great things and the exciting things about this. It does not have to become a permanent part of our management plans. However, if it does work, it also has the potential to expand. And right now this project is around metered parking spaces. And as everyone knows, there's a lot more going on the curb than metered parking spaces. And we are hopeful that we find enough utility in the project that it's something we could use in other curb space applications as well. A few things this project does not do, important to point out. It does not seek to increase overall parking meter revenue. We actually don't know what the parking meter revenue impacts will be of this project, in part because we anticipate the project will, to bullet 2, it won't increase all metered parking rates across the board. There are some places where we expect it to decrease parking rates, and that's because by looking at occupancy, we're going to create a zone framework that shows where the highest occupancies are, rates can go up, and where the lowest occupancies are, rates can go down. And with the goal of encouraging customers to perhaps walk an extra block if they have that ability, pay a little less to park, and still get to their destination, and thereby spread that demand over the supply better and make it easier for everyone to use those spaces. So again, we don't really know what the revenue impact of all of that is going to be. We also are not decreasing the number of reserved ADA accessible spaces that are on the street today. We will learn information about the occupancy and use of those ADA spaces, however. They will participate in the program from the data perspective, but we won't be removing them as a result of this. We don't even know if we will change the pricing of them at this point, but it will be interesting to find out more about their utilization. Yeah.
So does that mean that people who have placard access can use this is an app, right? Can use the app to find handicap spaces?
Yes, ma'am.
And they'll be done on the same basis as the others. It's just that they're restricted to handicap.
Right, they continue to have all the same restrictions, and one of the items we will talk with the community about this fall, after we get the sensor system in place and start the existing conditions data collection, is talk about pricing scenarios and the application of pricing as a tool. And I've met with the Disability Advisory Commission, and in that conversation, which was fulsome, they definitely expressed concern that folks who use ADA spaces may be also more price constrained than the population at large, and not only price constrained, but they are by the nature of the space physically constrained to how far they can walk from their car.
They may be.
And so we don't want to presume that the same pricing approach to those spaces is appropriate as might be to other spaces.
Because something 2 blocks away may not work.
May not work. Yeah, exactly. So we're sensitive to that, and that will be a conversation that we have at that time where we are preparing an ordinance to go to the board to allow us the the authority to change the prices, so we can figure out what that looks like.
Question. Will you be able from this data to determine whether people who are seeking handicapped access, but other people as well, what the turnaway rate is of people who are looking within a certain block radius and whether they're able to find parking or not? Because for handicap, that's a real issue.
So not necessarily directly. What we will have is the occupancy rates and duration of stay in the spaces. So we can isolate the ADA space as a population of the total spaces, and we can look at them and see if they're over occupied versus under occupied. We won't know if the people parking in them are legally parking in them, because we don't, and I'll get into more of this in some of the other slides, but we're not collecting personally identifying information through the system. We're not even collecting license plates, so there's no way for the sensors to know if the person parking is a placarded person.
Yeah, that's not
Right, but conceivably down the road, you can come up with, the placard could have a sensor or have in it as well, which could provide the access,
Right, but also that turnaway piece, one of the goals, one of the hopes and goals of that third-party evaluation is that they can actually potentially pull in other data sources that our project itself does not provide in its scope, to look at, for instance, case studies of an intersection or an area of spaces and what's going on to access them that you can see with our CCTV cameras or something.
But
so
you
there's
can't
like
tell someone who tried to use the app for a space and was not able to find a space.
Correct, because the public facing information will get pushed out through API and through an app that we will create, or a mobile friendly web interface, and it will provide data to you, but it's not going to be a method for you to provide data to it necessarily, at least at this point in time. It might be interesting if we can integrate messaging or something into it where someone can provide that input back that says, I tried to find this and I couldn't find it. And we can actually look into that.
As a note, as someone who does use handicapped access, it's not as critical to me as it was originally, but I'm absolutely an example of, I would go around the block, and if there wasn't space within the block, I would drive home. You know?
Yep.
Question.
Yep.
Have they done any hypothetical pricing structures, kind of reviews so far?
Not yet.
So the statement that they're not seeking to increase overall parking revenue is really just aspirational. They
No,
really don't have a sense whether or not it will until after they start doing the pricing.
Well, so we have not created any pricing models yet, because we don't have the existing conditions data on what's going on to see where we'll call it like hot spots are and green spots. But in terms of project purpose, it's not the goal, and it's not a target, or everything about the pricing model will be to maximize use and access across the network. So to decrease the hotspots and to increase the use of the other spaces. So we won't know until that gets implemented if the externality of that is a relative increase in meter revenue.
During the
May I ask a question? Question?
Can we do the finish this follow up and then get to the person on the Yep. Mm-hmm.
During the course of this pilot, do you plan to have, or how many pricing reviews might you have during the course of the study to see whether or not you're meeting that goal, so it doesn't turn into like surge pricing and hot lane experiences?
So let me keep going through some of the slides, because I think some of these questions are going to be answered. And so the person on the
Thank you.
on the horn on the internet could hold for 1 second. I might get through some of these high level questions about how it's all going to work, and then we can dig in some more. So yeah, the last bullet is we are not creating dynamically or fast changing metered pricing. This is not like a hot lane. It's not going to change by the minute. It's not even going to change by the day. It's about quarterly that we will make pricing adjustments based on roughly, if you can imagine, 2 months of data, a month of analysis and rejiggering, and then a release of a new price structure. So that's the goal. And within the 2 years roughly that we will, after install in existing conditions, we would expect a full 2 years of these quarterly changes, so up to 8. The project area, you see this sort of rough map on the screen. It's about 4,500 metered parking spaces in our, primarily our Metro Rail corridors, these commercial corridors. And that's where the vast majority of our metered parking space is, but it is not everything. For instance, you'll notice Columbia Pike is not on this map. And this is the starting point for our pilot. There are a couple off-street locations that we anticipate will be included in the project. We are working on the addition of a parking lot, at least in a temporary sense, that's off of 22nd Street in Crystal City area. It'll probably be part of the project for a little while, and then it may transition out as that parking lot actually gets reutilized. There is space at Long Bridge that could potentially be part of the project for purposes of understanding the utilization. And there is space near Virginia Highlands Park. And the Courthouse Plaza parking lot is actually an off-street metered parking area. It's already part of the project. A quick technology overview. And I added a few bullets from prior slides, and maybe even what you saw before, because I'm trying to make sure I'm hitting on things that I think you might have questions about. I am not a tech guru though. So if you have questions that are above my technology pay grade, I'm gonna write them down and I'll get answers for you, but I might not know all of them right now. This project is constructed of a few key technology components. One is our in-ground sensors. One is our wireless gateways. I'll say there's a software piece of it, the staff management dashboards that we are using to understand the data and to manage the project overall, the public-facing web view and interface, and our API, which will be one of the key byproducts of the implementation. The pilot project does not capture or store private data. Cameras are not being used as a part of this pilot project. And that was pretty intentional because there were solutions to our sort of request that included camera elements, but we really felt like that this was going to best fit the community's level of comfort and allow us to get the kind of data that we needed to do good decision making. I also mentioned here, there's no interconnection between the project system and any other county data system. And this was something else that we talked about a lot in the design and the procurement for this project. Data is available out of our system to use and integrate through an API.
What does that mean, sorry, when you say API, what is that API responsible for?
So an API,
I know what an API is, I'm wondering what information it's translating back and forth and who has access to it.
So it's going to be public, and when we publish it, it'll actually probably be published on the county's open data page.
Okay.
So there are other kinds of data that the county pushes out in like a flow, and it'll be there. So anyone who wanted to work with the data set could access it there. It's going to have two main elements, the price and the occupancy information. And so that occupancy data it's the whole system, so it'll be those roughly 4,500 parking spaces and whether they've got a car in them or not in real time.
Okay, excellent, thank
So
you.
she brought it up earlier, it's pushing data
Sorry.
one way, it's not gonna be,
It's
not
doing
pulling
it,
data.
okay.
So users will also be able to kind of user case stories where they can say, hey, I tried to park, this happened.
Yeah.
And, get the information back to the API to fix it or try to.
So there are a couple, so I wrote that note down to, what's your name again? Jackie's comment, because they're in our current dashboard view as we're working on developing the interface, we know there are places where a user can provide input, and it could be as simple as, this doesn't make sense, or that color doesn't work, or I didn't know how to make something show up for me. But it could also be, I used it at this time to find a space here, and it didn't work for me, or there's some other problem. So that we can work on what those user sort of real-time comments can be. But separate from that, we have a whole outreach process, which I'll talk about a little bit more in the presentation. And the outreach will continue through the course of the project. And once we get to that phase where we are going through iterations of pricing changes, we're going to have a few different ways people can provide feedback. So people might just have feedback on the price, and they might not like where they normally park and the new price that it has. But they also might have feedback on the price change, but I'm not seeing anything happen here, or it didn't make it any easier for me to find a space. And so we'll have different ways for people to provide that. A little more deep dive on our technology. The stall occupancy sensor is in ground, and it will be in ground in 99.9% of the applications here. That one parking lot that I mentioned that we're trying to get incorporated into the project, maybe a surface mount application, because that parking lot may go away, and we'd love to be able to just take those sensors and put them somewhere else. But everywhere you see it today, you'll see these being installed today because we're in the midst of that process in ground, completely wireless, battery operated, very low power, and they're supposed to have roughly a 10-year lifespan. So they core drill into our asphalt in the center of a parking space. They delineate the parking spaces so they know where the center of the space is, and they drop that sensor in and they epoxy over the top to seal it in and protect it from the elements. Theft in the elements, yep. And
How much do the sensors cost?
these are roughly $100 a piece. So they're not high cost in their individual nature, but obviously an install process for them, if you add labor and whatnot, there are economies of scale. So we are trying to roll out everything we can now, and as we do stuff in the future, we're hoping we can avoid as much digging up of our sensors as we can. But you also know this, Arlington's always doing a lot of street projects, so it's kind of inevitable.
You said it's one for each parking spot?
Yep, and so a big change from a parking maybe user and management experience is we have to delineate the spaces. And Arlington hasn't done that for parking spaces, even in our metered areas, maybe ever, or maybe since a long time ago. So I get mixed community feedback on that. There's a lot of questions like, how is that going to affect available parking? Is it going to reduce the number? Is it going to increase the number because now you're drawing official lines? But I also get a lot of comments about how happy people are because they think it's going to increase parking etiquette politeness because people now know where they're supposed to be and everyone else can see. So if they're over the lines or not being efficient in their parking job, they're obviously at fault for that kind of thing. So I hope it's helpful, and it's certainly necessary actually for the design of this project.
Are these RF sensors, radio frequency sensors? Do you know what frequency band they use? Or what
Yeah, I was
kind
gonna
of
ask
sensor
that.
type?
It's on the next slide, Gary, so let her get through her presentation, please. Hold questions till the end, thank you.
Just so on the ball though. So just the last thing though, because the sensor itself is really using there's two technologies, and one of them is sort of a radar. It's a metal detection thing, bouncing these things off. It says, oh, car's there. Oh, car's not there. But when it's sending the signal of information, it's using LoRaWAN. And you all probably understand it better than I, but my quick take on it, it's the low power wide area, and it's a free set of bands that they're using. It's the industrial, scientific, and medical bands.
ISM, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Part 18.
So it's intended to be a sustainable system that it allows all of our technology to be very low power and to last a long time. And in this case, our wireless gateways are being mounted to, by and large, our traffic signal poles. If you look really closely on some of those poles, you'll be able to see them. Compared to the 4,500 sensors that are going to be out there, there are only going to be, I think, about 70 gateways, so they're less frequent, thankfully. But there's still a fair bunch, and some of them will be on county facilities like the library and probably something on Long Bridge to just get the coverage we need over all those parking spaces. In terms of software, I just wanted to highlight how we are using software for installation management. So our team built out a Power BI tool that's a dashboard we share internally with county staff who are helping us to manage a project, basically. And these are just some screenshots of the kind of information we're able to share to public stakeholders. This is how we look at this install schedule. So we see each block that our team is planning to install on, what dates they're installing on, and I can do look-aheads to communicate to the Chamber of Commerce or communicate to police so that they can anticipate where they're going to need to be as the install is happening throughout the community and kind of rolling through. We're able to communicate with bids in this way. So by and large, your typical community member, this is not going to be the detail they need, but we're able to track our progress, see how much we have left to complete, and get key stakeholders on board to be able to communicate with their network to get ready for the install happening in front of them. And the install, I mean, as you can imagine, there's the core drill and the line delineation. It doesn't take a long time, but it's a little disruptive. And we want to make sure businesses know it's happening and the community knows it's happening as it rolls through. And I'll talk a little more about that communication stuff in a bit. And we're starting to look at how we turn our data into information. And so on the one hand, there's that Power BI dashboard at the top, which is something we created internally to actually merge a bunch of data the county already has, which I think is pretty cool because we've got our sensor data in here. We've got permit data for certain types of right-of-way permits and permit activities that might conflict with our installation. We have the paving schedule in here because we're coordinating with paving schedules so we don't roll in and put a sensor in and have it dug up for repaving. And we even have special events and other things in here in an integrated way. So I'm excited, and a lot of the folks on my team are just excited to be able to bring those data sets together in an integrated way for a planning purpose. And then the bottom screenshot is just our vendor internal dashboard showing us when sensors come online. That's a screenshot of what a day in the life of the Courthouse Plaza parking lot. And so as you can see, most of them, 92.5%, are occupied, which is totally normal for Courthouse Plaza. But I will anticipate our public view. It's not going to be a space by space view like this. It's probably going to be more a block by block, color coded. Is there space available? Is there not? So that you can plan around it, but not get caught in the weeds of whether someone has just entered or left a specific space. And approach. So this is a cyclical process. So once we get the system in place, it's going to be there to gather data, and it's going to give us existing conditions so that we know our starting point. We know those hot spots of really high occupancy. We know low spots. And we can start to design those pricing frameworks with the intent of influencing that occupancy and evening out that activity. And we're also going through at the same time phases of public outreach. Once we've exited, I'll call it the existing conditions phase, and we have gone to the board for authorization to change meter prices without their direct approval each time. Right now, our parking meter prices are encoded in code. They pick a price and that's what they adopt, and you can't change it without their help. What we're going to be asking them for this winter is the permission to do those quarterly changes without going to the board each time. And that will be a sunsetted period of time that we can do that. So we'll ask them for that privilege for a period of time during the pilot project, and we will go back to them at the end of that pre-approved period to talk about what our final recommendations are based on the pilot. So those cycles begin once we have that permission and that privilege, and we will conduct analysis on the data. We will make a decision about a pricing schema or design for that period. We will implement that design along with a communications strategy that gets the word out the best we can about the parking meter prices and the price changes. And it'll all go out through the API, so people who are accessing it will see the new prices. And for your average person parking at a space, you get the price information all the same ways you normally do. The meters don't have a sticker on them that say what the price is. The meter itself, through its data, tells you what you're going to pay. The Park mobile app tells you what you're going to pay, and all of those will be pushed the new price schedule. So a customer will always know what they're going to pay, even as those changes happen. And then we do it again, roughly every 3 months for the last 2 years of the project. Our outreach and engagement to date, my initial job has been to do what I'll call the road show. And I've been to a lot of commissions and held a lot of calls and informal meetings and formal meetings with entities such as bids. We have created, and some of you may have viewed, a virtual public meeting video. So we held a virtual public meeting in February and created a video, and that's available on our project website, so you can view that. It's a slightly longer but earlier version than this one, so it may or may not have more information for you, I'm not sure. And And we're just continuously getting that feedback from different types of commissions and responding to requests to present or be present so that folks can learn more about the project. That's been what I'll call phase 1 of outreach. We have entered phase 2 of outreach, and that second phase corresponded with when we started the installation process primarily. And that installation process puts us more in front of the community, in front of the neighborhoods, impacting them and having them ask questions about what it is we're doing. So the phase 2 outreach has featured business, basically door-to-door knocking on every block, using those data about our install schedule and the blocks we'll be on. Those have been provided to an outreach team. They're knocking on the businesses' doors and they're telling them about the project and why they're there and why they're going to see temporary no parking signs and what's going to happen next, kind of thing. So we are also happily tracking geographically the business coverage that we're getting. So that same Power BI dashboard has a tab now that shows us geographically what businesses we've touched. And so as we get to the end of our install process, if we feel like we've got any big gaps, we can go in and fill them. We're about to start pop-ups at farmers markets and any other sort of bid or neighborhood-based activities that have been connected to us. So that will be the end of this month and in June primarily, so that we can talk to people who we might not have hit at businesses and who might have seen some of the signs and things around. We've also got decals on our multimeters. So a typical parker, so they're going up with the install schedule as they're going across the community. Those decals, they have a QR code on them and information about how to get more information about the project. So a typical parker, if they're wondering what's going on, can go straight to that way. And they can access our open online feedback form. It's been open since the end of February. Y'all are welcome to add your feedback there, and we continue to collect that. And that feedback form for this phase 2 is going to be open all the way through the end of installation. And at that point, we'll switch over to a third phase, and I'll call that the pricing discussion phase, because it'll be all about how existing conditions look and what pricing changes will look like in the future, what people can expect about how we're going to use those data. And this is really my second to last slide, I believe, and it's really outlining some of the questions I got in advance. So I'll talk through them now, and we can talk about whether or not I've already answered them. But is there a potential for higher parking costs? There's definitely a potential for location-specific higher parking rates. But again, because we're also expecting location-specific lower parking rates, we don't know what the overall impact might be to a single household pocketbook or to the county pocketbook, if you want to put it that way. The goal is not to disproportionately burden anybody. So some of the conversations we have had and will continue to have are, what about retail employees that may not have off-street parking and have heretofore been using on-street parking near the business, and they know what price to expect? Are they going to start experiencing higher prices? So we're looking at that because, again, our goal is to always have alternatives. So those employees might be able to, in a future price scheme, find lower price parking than they do today nearby, but maybe not right where they have parked in the past. So these things are they're areas of input actually that we're really hoping to continue to get, and we'll be targeting different types of outreach, including things such as focus groups with certain types of folks, to get the sense of how it's impacting them as we go through this multi-year process. So I talked about that disproportionately affecting low-income drivers. We're not aiming to do that. I think there's a wide variety of drivers and purposes why they come and park on the street in our commercial corridors, from frequenting different types of businesses, and in the types of business also, potentially mean different types of price sensitivity. So right now, we don't have a reason to believe there's going to be a disproportionate effect, but rather more of an increase of options. So instead of one price everywhere, there'll be different prices, and people will have all that information on the app. So they'll be able to see they can park in a certain place for one price or another place for another price, and weigh the relative benefits and cost of walking a little bit farther or paying a little bit less money, that kind of thing. With regard to difficulty finding available parking spots, our hope is in fact that this system will make it much easier for people to find available parking, because right now there isn't a way for people to know where they can park, like where there's going to be available on-street space. So on the one hand, I have mixed feelings because I'm not trying to incentivize driving to corridors that have only so much driving space. But when people do decide to drive, we want people to have certainty, and we don't want people to waste their time. And I think this idea of optimizing the experience of every mode we offer people, I think is just using our assets more wisely. So our goal would be for people to use our app interface and the interfaces of third-party app developers who use that API to see the data right there. They'll see in whatever method that interface provides the places where it's easiest to find a parking space and the places where it'll be harder at the particular time that they're going. And we also anticipate, because we'll be constantly collecting data, that there'll be the ability to show not just real time right now what's happening, but historical and future projection. And you kind of might have a sense of this if you use Google to predict how long it's going to take you to get somewhere at a certain day and time of the week, and they give you that projection. Basically, it's all based on the past, right? And we will have past data, and we're planning to have our interface be able to show people that sense of future projection, as well as the here, like exactly right now what's going on. And infrastructure investment cost and challenges of operations and maintenance. And this is a great one that I haven't really hit on in the past in presentations, but this is a big project and it's being paid for by VDOT. So that's great today. And it does beg the question of what we want to do in the future. And I think it is a question that we will be answering as we go through the project, because it's going to be a combination of trade-offs and willingness to pay, because the county has to decide if it wants to pay for upkeep of a system like this over the long term and over such a geographic expanse, or if we find that the things we learn from a system this broad and deep can actually be folded into, I'll call it, patterns of policymaking that don't require data all the time. So we might not have to have this system in place for 20 years to use the learnings of this system for 20 years. It also might be that what we do is we shift. And right now it's doing metered parking. And 5 years from now, we might shift it, or sooner, to loading zones and other types of curb space. So we still apply the technology to a different geography. We don't try to maintain the sensors in the other geography, because we actually have learned and created a model of pricing that is a combination of that sensor information, land use, other activity that we can correlate to one another and use in developing such a model. So long story short is we don't have a firm commitment to do this for the next, capital improvement plan. But that's the excitement of a pilot project that's being supported by a state fund that's interested in how we use technology better. Because I think we're going to learn a lot through it. That's, let me just double check. Yep, that's the end of my formal slides. Happy to field more questions, and I know
Jim.
Yeah.
Yes.
You politely held your question. You get to go first.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Melissa. The natural skeptic in me coming out. You said early on that this is really not dynamic pricing, but it sounds like it is, in the sense that, and in the very early slide you talk about, this is testing one approach. And when I first raised my hand, my question is, well, what is that approach? It sounds like the approach, or at least what's being contemplated after the data gathering phase, is to institute a form of dynamic pricing in order to, disincent drivers from staying for extended periods in some parking spots in high occupancy areas, by raising prices and that kind of thing. So it does sound to me as though you are really talking about dynamic pricing. Is that not the case?
So here it just might be how different people phrase things. When I presented to Transportation Commission, there are commissioners there who love the idea of it being dynamic and want it to be more dynamic than what we propose. The distinction I'm trying to make is that we are only going to change prices roughly every 3 months. So unlike a hot lane where when you get on there, you need to see the price and you don't know it till you arrive. And then when you arrive, it's too late. That's what you have to pay. There will be the potential, especially through these public-facing interfaces, apps or mobile interfaces, for people to know in advance. They'll know what the prices are, and they'll know what the prices are for each hour of the day, and it's not going to change within that 3-month period.
Right. So the dynamism is quarter to quarter. Let me ask you this: you talk about one of the goals being to increase availability of parking spaces. Does that not really mean, increasing parking meter rates so that people will spend shorter periods of time? Because you're not talking about increasing the number of parking spaces, right?
We are not talking about increasing the number of parking spaces. What we mean by that is that if you're a person experiencing parking as you go to, I don't know, you're going out to dinner with your friends in Clarendon, and when you go there without information about availability and without any reason to differentiate one space from another in the neighborhood, you kind of go down the street and you look until you find a space. And when there are the typical, I should say the common behaviors are going down the main corridors, the most visible parking spaces that are metered that people have been to before, and those are likely to be the ones that are the most well utilized. And that means it's going to be the hardest for you to find an open one. So what we want to strive for is a parking rate rate structure that takes those highest utilized spaces, makes them expensive enough in theory to push the desirability of them down, and have you, Jim, when you're going to meet your friend Sally for dinner, say, well, I could park there for one price, which is higher than I'm used to paying, or 2 blocks over on this stretch of road, which is not on my typical path when I search. There's a set of parking spaces with availability and the price is $1 cheaper per hour. And you could make that choice. So it's not to change how long people stay, it's to change how they choose where they stay, really. Because we're the hypothesis, which we have yet to sort of set up and prove, is that there are spaces in the network that are underutilized, and there are spaces in the network that are overutilized. And the optimal utilization from an experience standpoint in the industry anyway, on a given block face, is about 80%. And what it comes out to is like there's always a space available. So if we can use a price structure that gets us to that point where on any given block face, there's always going to be a space available, it's going to dramatically improve your experience in finding the spaces. And you're going to have these options. So you can choose the more expensive one or the less expensive one.
Let me ask one more question and then I'll be done. You said that there isn't going to be any collection of PII, so you're not going to know license plates or income levels or things like that. That will, and that's a good thing, but it seems to me that means that you really will be limited in data gathering with respect to low income drivers, since you will be blind as to whether the drivers are low income or not low income. Isn't that the case?
Yes, it is correct. This system won't collect those data. Let me just take a quick note. I'm very bad at talking and writing 2 different things, so I have to. So you're right. What we have and what we're hoping to use are just some other tools to follow along in the process. So one is targeting our retail businesses and their access that they can give us to their employee experience, so that as we go through this multi-year and multi-quarter changing process, we can get their input on their experience in a more qualitative way. So we might do focus groups, we might do periodic surveys. We haven't totally flushed that out yet, but we do anticipate, and we've already built out, and amazingly and kind of interestingly through our current door-to-door outreach, we are developing a contact database to let us get back to the businesses and connect with their employees. So that's not going to be every low-income driver, but the businesses are also the source of customers who are often using the spaces. So if the businesses feel like they have a customer base that they'd like to better integrate into the impacts of our process, we also have that way to reach them through businesses. We also have some other ideas, and those include the potentially broader ways that the VDOT third-party evaluation might be able to use different data than the data our system provides to look at what's happening in a geography. So it's not the same as being able to target by income type, income level, but it might be able to target some of those other types of impacts that are broad, like low income households also disproportionately, are impacted by the safety on streets, because they're actually not always drivers. Like low income folks in our community maybe tend to be more likely to be riding buses or walking to get from point A to point B. And so the other kinds of negative externalities we're trying to reduce, such as double parking and cruising, which can be safety issues on the street. If we can show improvements in those, which again, we hope that third-party assessment will help us to do, then we are potentially disproportionately benefiting people who have less money. So there's a lot of pieces there, but I do want to acknowledge that is a weakness of the project data and the system data, but it is one that we had, that it's always a trade-off in how to figure out how to get information about folks that helps you make a decision on their behalf, and that's where we are right now.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Someone,
I don't know, I don't want to be the follow-up person, because I don't feel like, because he's right here.
Yoni?
Real quick. There must be comparable projects in other cities.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Can you speak to some of the lessons you've learned from those other projects that are already in operation, and in particular, success metrics?
So yes, to an extent, and there's a little bit more information, I think, in my virtual meeting presentation set, because it's got a slide or two on this, but I'll just highlight that this is happening in some other cities. The most robust evaluation of a similar project probably is in San Francisco. And yet, like, even DC has done something like this in I think a smaller scale than what we're ultimately aiming for. But in the San Francisco evaluation, some of the highlights that piqued our interest were, one, that the overall cost of parking across the areas that they were implementing decreased and did not increase. And what I mean by that is that average cost, more spaces went down in price than went up in price over the network. So that was something that wasn't obviously going to be the case when I was imagining it. So that was nice to see. And they also basically saw performance improvements across many metrics. Now, as a person trying to implement this, and I'm reading the evaluation, I'm thinking, how did they actually get to that measurement? Because the evaluation material is not always that detailed in methodology, but they reported across many of the same metrics we're reporting, decreases in the negative externalities, decreases in circling and associated VMT and associated greenhouse gases, the better rates, more accessible rates of occupancy in the highest occupancy blocks, so lower, and better utilization in other blocks. So in that particular example, they were getting performance in all the areas we're trying to. Yeah, and when I mentioned something that kind of relates to this and relates to an earlier question about the particular approach we're using here, when we talk about the approach we've selected and how this is just one approach, these other cities have all taken slightly different technology approaches. So from the perspective of, some cities have done a combination of sensors and cameras. Some cities have done what I'll call a sampling and modeling combo. So they've done a sampling of data and created a model to predict what they think is going to happen everywhere else and apply that to the street. The approach we are taking, perhaps simplistically, and maybe kind of like an elephant, is to not model anything, right, for this period of time, but to sensor everything. So we're not using cameras, but we are putting a sensor. It's like the universe of spaces is going to have a sensor. And that was because we were convinced in the process of procurement and design that that was going to give us the most accurate result and the best data set to work with. Whether we move in future years to some modeling that builds out of that remains to be seen. But that's just an example where the other jurisdictions are trying to do this, mostly on a smaller scale, but they are not necessarily using the same technology approach that we are.
You guys are going for seconds. So, Andrea?
So, you mentioned like the data sets that y'all are using Power BI. So how do you get all that information, all that different data coming to you to be able to update Power BI?
Yeah, so these are all data sets that are available internally at the county through different programs that haven't necessarily been integrated into one visualizer the way that we are. So it's fun in the sense that I think the county internally is doing a lot more to get everyone to use the same set of tools and to get everyone to start documenting information. It's Power BI, I would say, and again, I'm not the technology person, but I would call it the visualizer interface for digesting a bunch of other types of data. And at least in the engineering and operations world, a lot of our data, the reason they exist is they're being entered as like assets in Cartograph, which is this other sort of feeder interface. So I don't use Cartograph, but our permitting team does, but we can grab that data set out of Cartograph and feed it directly into our Power BI. And it takes other staff with different skill sets than I have to make that happen, but it's super exciting to see it happen. But yeah, they're all county data sets.
Jackie, starting back over at the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, sorry, Laura.
No, I'm good.
Okay, sorry.
Some quick observations and a question. My question is, if you're not monitoring neighborhood overflow, I'm concerned that this may drive people or more people into the free parking spaces that are the neighborhoods that line all of these areas. And if you're not monitoring that, you won't see that impact, but the neighbors will. So, I mean, a way of doing that would be to put sensors there, even if you're not charging, and then you know whether you're actually getting more parking and double parking, double parking, whatever, in neighbors. And some of these are zoned, so it's illegal parking, but but right now you could push people out of expensive spaces, and you might not push them to lower legal spaces. You might push them to free neighborhood spaces. I would be concerned about that. The second thing is.
Do you want me to talk about that before you?
Well, let me just do the three and you can pick what you want to answer. The second one really is more what Jim was saying. I am concerned that no matter how you cut it, this is an income-based incentive system. So the people who are able to participate, or people who have more money, are going to be more able to participate. And no matter how you do it, if you're making it more expensive for something that's desirable, you're making that more available to people who have more money. Just a thought. And then the third one is you could ask the businesses to do polls for their patrons, because it seems to me that while this is happening during the pilot, if I were having dinner at Circa, I would really want to have an opportunity to say, gee, usually I don't have any trouble finding a parking space, but with this new system, I couldn't get near the place. And you might be, and that's what the retailers will want to know. Their employees is one thing. They're going to want to know, are their patrons finding it easier or harder? Right. So I would say just a simple poll that could be added. They could download and give to their patrons.
Absolutely. So I'll try to hit on all of those. So the first one was this could drive people into neighborhoods, and we have heard that so far in our outreach process. There are a couple pieces that we're thinking are going to be at play here. One is that our system will have the ability to show things like off-street commercial parking opportunities as well as on-street. So we're hoping that the kinds of information of availability that we're pushing to people through our interface will give them more options that are more desirable than neighborhood parking. However, and the corridors where the metered parking spaces are tend to also be lined because of prior impacts with residential permit parking zones, which are enforceable and enforced, and so there's a means.
I mean, that is a common problem.
Right, and so it gives us a tool versus, and it also gives neighborhoods that aren't zoned a tool to push back if they think they're getting negative externality with it. But we're also open to seeing if it's just a problem. Like if it's a problem, that's something that we will learn from the pilot. We also recognize that one of the concepts that we're measuring here is potentially the price sensitivity or the elasticity of demand based on price. And that elasticity may not be the same across the whole community, neighborhood by neighborhood or person by person, obviously. And so if we see that high demand spaces in a particular area do not budge when we raise price, that will be a lesson. And that will also tell us something about whether or not it makes sense to have the higher price. Because why would you have a space be at $5 an hour instead of $175 if in that time of moving it up, it did nothing to change occupancy? Another concept that relates to that is latent demand that we can't see that might come out with increases in price. So someone who prices might reduce demand from some people who are more price sensitive, but if others who are less price sensitive all of a sudden know they can find a space in front of their favorite restaurant now because we just made it more available, and they're going to drive now instead of take Metro, because they're willing to pay the price
instead of take Uber.
Or Uber, then maybe they pay that price and they fill it up, and we still don't see a budge in that occupancy. So these are things that we are aware are potential things to look out for. We may or may not have a good handle on what's exactly happening, but we will know ultimately if pricing gets us anywhere toward our goal if we don't see any shifts in that.
Anyone who's thinking the option is drive or Metro, if you're coming from neighborhoods, there's no Metro in the neighborhoods, and there's no buses in the neighborhoods. So when I said, if I go to a place, there's no parking place, what do? I go home and either cry because I can't make it to the appointment, or I see if I can get an Uber if it's worth it.
Right.
But, it doubles the price of dinner.
Right. And on a sidebar note, I guess, the parking and curb space team is also doing a lot every day to figure out what the right balance of curb space is between things like metered parking, 15-minute parking, that sort of pickup drop-off area that people need to safely, for those companies that are picking up and delivering food, or people to safely do that without causing safety issues. So there's whole elements of that management question that are not going to be handled by the project. But we are sensitive to that concern, and we are also looking for ways to address reaching people who are impacted. So on the one hand, I don't want to say we'll hear from the neighborhoods if it's bad, but that will happen. But we're also hoping to proactively involve them. It just hasn't been, the first tranche of outreach has been very focused on the businesses in the corridors and the folks that use them and work there. Her other couple bullets, still income-based, more money equals more access. Yes, more money would in theory equal more access to those highest demand locations, but we are hoping to open up our price model to lower cost spaces that were never there before. So if we can offer a space for 25 cents an hour instead of 175, and it's only 2 blocks away or 3 blocks away, then in theory, mobility and other things considered, we could increase. And there tends to be a range. Yeah.
They have 25-cent spaces?
The average price in the system went down, which no one expected. It was a very unusual,
Yeah, well, that would be
unexpected
great.
result.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Gary?
Yeah, I think Miranda.
But yeah, Miranda's up behind Gary.
Thank you.
I got you.
I actually 2 questions. One kind of piggybacking on what Kim was saying, in that what happens to the existing like mobility, special mobility spaces, where like are those being considered? Will they change? People who have the placards that allow them to have closer access.
The ADA spaces, yeah, those won't change location. It's TBD whether they change price at all. So they will continue to operate and be regulated exactly the way they are today and limited only to those folks. One of the things that I'm interested in maybe seeing here is if we do find that through the data, they are very highly utilized in a particular neighborhood or location, sub-neighborhood, and therefore potentially annoying for users because they're always full and then they still need an accessible space. We might be able to prioritize the addition in planning processes and curb space allocation of more spaces. But we just don't know anything about their occupancy today. The best data we have today about our utilization is transaction data. And that data is flawed, as you can imagine. People don't always pay. And that's the other thing that could affect price sensitivity, because if we're talking about an area with very low compliance, is what we call it, paying your meter basically, that area may not be very price sensitive because the people who are using it are not paying any attention to whether or not it's expensive or cheap. So there are these interrelated factors, but with those spaces, the goal is to learn a lot about them by measuring their occupancy and then see how that feeds into either pricing changes where ADA spaces may have more than one price, depending on where they are in the community, or maybe not, and whether it informs us in terms of supply, or whether we need to provide more to increase access.
That part.
Yeah.
And then one other question, which you may not have as part of the pilot, but everyone knows that once you put something underground, it fails. Not 100% of the time, obviously, but you will have a bad sensor and you will have bad. How does that get replaced, and is that part of the plan? Like, do we have an understanding of the cost and the just opportunity lost to have that sensor replaced?
So we're very early days, and I think our biggest, so it's going underground, but barely. It's under this like very thin layer of epoxy. So it's at the surface.
So it's not asphalted in. There's actually something you can peel back to get to it, or you can more easily get to than jackhammering up the street.
Well, easier than jackhammering up the street, but when we've talked to our vendor and we ask them what's the feasibility of like taking in a sensor, fixing it, putting it back or something, their answer is not very feasible because the cost of pulling it up, shipping it to its source, having it fixed, sending it back, again, these are only about $100 a piece. Mm-hmm. So one of the nice things is that low per sensor cost, and it makes the install and all the rigmarole around it be the bigger cost. What we anticipate, based on everything we know about our vendor partner applications and other places where they've used the technology, is that they're not going to just fail. Like there might be some software things that they can do with remote access to the sensor, but they're going to last a long time. The thing that's going to make them fail is when we dig them up. So we are likely to have unplanned utility work done in a parking space, and people are going to dig them up without us knowing. People are going to dig them up with us knowing, and so we have planned within the pilot essentially a kind of contingency for replacement that's likely to happen every year. And then we will have to plan for that to the extent we go outside the pilot years and we are budgeting for it ourselves. There will be, we're going to use the pilot years to understand what that loss ratio looks like. Mm-hmm. And it's going to tell us what we might have to budget for loss in the longer term.
Okay.
Gary?
Yeah, thanks. I assume this means if any particular district that may be designated as a more desirable commercial district, like near the metro stop on Wilson Boulevard, does that mean that the pricing for all the spots in that area would be the same, similarly high, or would there be the option for having a couple different degrees of pricing, like the higher pricing, medium, maybe a little bit lower, so that there are still options there? It's not as if everyone has to pay a premium doesn't mean you'll get the spot, but if this is a real-time system,
Right.
you know, the chances someone just went out of a lower place spot and you're able to grab that one.
Right.
Rather than having everything at the same uniform price.
Right, so we are presently working on finalizing, I'll say like the out of the starting block price zone structure. What is the reasonable geography and granularity that we can break down the community into and still analyze it and have it be useful, and have it reflect likely decision-making breaking points. So, and as we're doing that, an example might be that we're using currently we'll call like metro station areas / planning areas that you might be familiar with, neighborhood planning areas that are established buckets that the community does a lot of things in. So we're starting with that. We're breaking it down by arterial roadway. Again, we're trying to use buckets that are already mappable and sort of frameworks that are used for planning arterial versus side street or non-arterial roads. And that will create sort of an initial likely pricing structure. So the side roads, all things being equal, might be changed or tweaked separate from, like, they'll have a different price level than that arterial corridor street. However, we have to see the existing, it's all right now just a straw man, a dummy, because we haven't seen any of the existing conditions data. And once we get that, we're gonna see if that straw man makes sense to move forward with, or if it has to be more granular, or if there are divisions that we wouldn't anticipate. Like, it's always harder to find on the westbound Clarendon side of the couplet and not on the eastbound because of the way people, I don't know, enter the neighborhood. Maybe in Ballston it's harder eastbound because a lot of people come into Ballston to do things from west, and that's the busier set of parking spaces, and it's not the same as the other side of the divided street type of thing. So there are things that we're gonna see, but we don't know yet. But the goal is to walk a fine line of sensibility and legibility for customers, so they're not like, I don't know where the next price is gonna be, looking on a map, or and like, okay, these are available, and this is in the zone that's this price, and this is in the zone that's that price, and they can make a decision.
I guess maybe to be a little bit more specific with an example, suppose you take the courthouse parking lot, and you could either do it that it's all high price parking, or you could do it a mix, half as high price and half as more moderate price, so that there are still options there, because throughout the day, people will be coming and going, and you still kind of take your chance.
Right.
The day part you're there, is it only the high price ones, or maybe one just left out, the lower price one? In fact, I don't know if that would work for the better or the worse, but on the one hand, all you got is one choice. It's the more expensive one, but if you're lucky, there may be some percentage that were set aside, so it's not just superficially, oh, this is for the high rent payers, or it's still opportunities for others.
That might be an interesting outlier issue, because the courthouse parking lot is a lot, and it is really always busy, it seems like.
And there are people who have important business, they kind of need to be there on a timely basis.
Right, and we don't, so it also might not be price sensitive. So if it's not super price sensitive, the final outcome might not be a really, really high price, because why do it? But to take a different kind of example, if one of the things that we anticipate working with here is change in price over time of day. So it's not going to be that it's always the most expensive spot, but if that spot in Clarendon in front of something that's one of the bars there is like really busy between 6 and 10 p.m. at night, then maybe it's just the evening hours that have the highest price, and it has a lower price during other times of the day because it's not actually super occupied then.
And then you'd have to know that ahead of time, because you were saying earlier, you won't have the flexibility to change it except on a quarterly basis.
Right. So we'll have duration of stay and time of day data for the entire existing conditions period, and we'll be looking at hours of the day, especially in those high demand areas. And whether we do changes by time of day everywhere is probably not likely, because not every space is going to have that high variability. But those highest demand areas might, and we want to be able to to tweak it in that way. We also, it'll all be transparent to the customer because they'll see the price when they get there, but if they're using an app like Park Mobile, they'll also see the total price of their stay. If you're gonna stay for 3 hours and that's when the price change happens to more expensive, they'll see the whole price for the 3 hours and they'll be able to compare that to another location. So that's one of the tools we're looking at to try to be more sensitive.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Brandon?
So you're saying she's on the Park Mobile app. Is that the app integrated so that?
No, Park Mobile is the existing county third-party mobile app for booking, like say booking, for paying for parking. Yeah, and Park Mobile will likely be a consumer of the API. Okay. But the app that we're going to create is not I call it an app, but it's probably going to be a mobile-friendly website that is built by our project, is a third place. Unfortunately, it's really to kick off the viewing aspect because we anticipate the third-party developers will take the data and do their own visualization. Like Park Mobile will have this data in it. But for now, we want to make sure we have something coming out of the starting gate. There'll be a separate place you go, and it will show you all of the information we've talked about that come out of the system. So the availability in real time, the ability to pick your time of day that you want to go to that place to park, and what the likely availability is, and maybe regulations on it, like is the meter even running at that time of day, kind of information, as well as price information.
You have to go through the app A to be able to figure out where you want to park, and then you'll be charged through
Park Mobile. Yeah, and there are means for us, I believe, to allow you to click and go to Park Mobile directly on your phone, like it'll open that place on your phone. And people who, I know I have Park Mobile on my phone, but I've probably used it twice, primarily because I come here for work and I don't park at parking meter spaces very often. I'm usually using transit. But I do have it on my phone, and if I had both things on my phone, it would go to that app. And that's Park Mobile is where you have entered your vehicle information, so you can pay. Yeah, and so the goal would be for us to be able to direct people there if that's a thing that they have access to. In the future, the goal is for Arlington to not manage an interface at all, but to have third-party app holders using the data to show the data where it's most useful for customers. So you don't have to go outside of Park Mobile. It's just going to be in there. The price data, the availability data by time of day, and all of that jazz. Yeah. Okay.
Any more follow-ups for?
Just one other observation. As you were talking, it sounds like what you've got is people looking at their phone while they're driving, trying to figure out where it seemed like a lot of I'm watching my app for where the parking space is.
I have a retort, sort of. But there is a part of the project that I haven't featured here because it's the least developed at this point, but scoped into the work are up to 10 real-time digital displays that will be out on the street somewhere that would allow us to show in a wayfinding fashion so that you don't have to pull up your phone. But when you're going into Roslyn, you can see if there's available parking this way versus this way, and we'll hopefully have integrated information about available off-street parking garages. That's a little bit easier in one place for you to see.
Good. I just imagine everybody's going to have
I know. And
the garages, you hadn't mentioned that before. So.
Yeah.
The Costco parking lot, when you go into that, and Arlington has assigned X number of spots here.
Right. And so that will be part of the project, but again, it's kind of the least fleshed out at this point in time. But also, it's a tool that people can use to plan and use to respond. So that goal of having that buildup of data in the past will let you do the same thing you might do on Google. So hopefully you're not using Google other than with the audio directions to find your way to your restaurant, but it would be able to let you say, oh, well, in that neighborhood, at the time of day I'm going to meet my friends, these are the blocks that are most likely to be free. And then you make your plan about how to get to those blocks in whatever way makes sense.
That's a good point. Would your system have the capability for audio cues, verbal cues, or is it just visual now?
Well, it's not a directional system. So it's not.
No, I mean just to say there are X number of spots 3 blocks away, not block to block.
That's a good question. I don't know.
Sort of like a sign over in that area, there are 3 spots over there.
Right.
And then you're
Right.
still, you have to figure out how.
Yeah, voice reader kind of
Yeah,
thing.
exactly.
I guess that, ultimately it would be good to be able to say, you're on your way, I can reserve that spot as opposed to having, because everybody's working off the same information, so they're all going to rush to converge on one or 2 spots that might be available.
Well, and that's why we're not planning on showing them spot by spot.
All right.
But it'll
just
be more like block
information.
faces that are green, and you'll be looking for those green block faces instead of the red block faces. Yeah. And the hope is that it's a little more, a little less like that. I'm not anticipating really soon to roll out reservable on-street space system, because primarily anyone who's not using the app is going to park wherever they want, and we're not going to be able to keep them out of the spaces. So I think it'll be first come, first serve.
I've got a couple of questions for you.
Okay.
How did you choose the technology solution of the vendor?
It was a procurement.
Can you send that RFP to us?
Yeah.
Great, thanks. Did you use a privacy impact assessment to inform your project design?
Hold on a second. This is an action item. I need to make sure I don't lose it.
Thank you.
Say that one again. How did we?
Did you use a privacy impact assessment to inform the project design? I'm noticing a lot of, I think, thoughtful, privacy-informed design elements and choices, and I'm wondering if you used the privacy impact assessment as part of the design.
So that phrase doesn't ring any bells to me.
Okay.
So maybe not officially if there's an SOP for that. But what we did when we designed the procurement, and then when we did the procurement, we involved DTS extensively, and a lot of we had people on our interview, our selection advisory panel, who were participating in the pilot that you were just talking about in your updates that has recently closed, that Holly was closing out and going to report back to you on. And as I understood from all the things we talked about, staff, yep. And from all the things we talked about, we learned a lot about community concerns about privacy and about various ways of I think DTS staff know a lot, and they know a lot more than I do about the weak links in technology and the kinds of things that would be red flags. Like we talked earlier about how the system is not touching a county system, so there isn't a way for a hack into our system to do anything other than find out how full our parking spaces are, or to make the sensors blink on and off in ways that aren't true. So that's not very exciting for a hacker. But those folks were part of the procurement, and so they were really reading closely into the proposals to help us understand if there were problems with data privacy or security that we should be aware of at that time.
So this committee recommended that there be such an SOP, and that's why we're asking the question.
Yeah. So I mean, I would just say that that was a key, both to make sure we're procuring technology that's gonna work.
So they learned from it,
also-
but they didn't necessarily make it into a written.
Well, I don't know, because and I would defer actually to Nora on perhaps. Yes. I don't.
Oh, you're back.
So if you could ask, maybe follow up and see if there was any formal privacy assessment as part of project design, I'd appreciate it. It sounds like it got it in there, but just wondering if there was a formal.
Chris, do you remember that one at all?
Not off the top of my head. There's so many. So I could go and do some research.
And what was that term, a
Privacy impact assessment,
Yeah,
or any really formal, kind of
Privacy.
inputs to the project design.
And the folks here know, we did do a list of things that ought to be included in that.
It's great. It's a great draft.
We did a great list.
Awesome.
We just
No,
like it to
I
get
have
some
high
use.
confidence that the folks we've been working with
They know
were
what
looking
it
at that
is.
very closely and making sure that they were incorporating those
Probably.
considerations in terms of being a stakeholder.
Sure. For the API, have you come up with a licensing approach? Have you thought about potential using earning revenue fees from commercial accounts, or licensing the data to research institutions, or any kind of licensing strategy for the data?
No.
Okay.
Where we are now is that we believe in open access to our county data. Like if we're going to make it available, we want it to be available to anyone, equally. We also don't want to, right now, we don't have any plans to charge for it. However, we also recognize that some third parties that are going to use it will be able to resell it in their application for value add for them. And while we know that, it's not a priority right now to develop a cost structure to reflect that kind of use. However, we also have entities like Park Mobile, which are contracted to the county to provide a service to our community members, and we don't want them to resell this thing that we are creating. So there will be kind of a hard line drawn for Park Mobile to make sure they don't try to resell that, because they're our own vendor.
Yeah.
But we don't have a schema broader than that.
So thought is I support open data, but there's a level and rate at which a public person might be interested in that data for curiosity reasons that's much lower than what a commercial would be necessary for a commercial service. And so you can offer open data to the public at a rate that's lower and governed, and also earn revenue for commercial value. But I would also add the desire to probably share for free at higher rates for research purposes to research institutions on different terms. So just some inputs to think about your licensing.
No, that's really nice to hear. Yep.
Will the data be used for real-time enforcement?
So realistically, there isn't anything. There's like a laugh line, but there isn't any money in this project that's paying for more enforcement staff, if that makes sense.
Right.
So the fact that we have the potential to match up, and we do, and we plan on doing this as part of the way we analyze what's going on. We're going to be looking at the correlation between transactions and occupancy to see what that compliance metric is. That compliance metric should allow us to provide previously unavailable information to police and parking enforcement on places where they have low compliance. Whereas before to date, it's more of a spot check thing, or where they think they know that they've had people not paying tax. So there is opportunity there, but to the extent to which police could operationalize it remains to be seen, because they're so overstretched. Even in my tiny team that manages the curb and has certain responsibilities over it, I feel like every day we are asking them to enforce stronger in different areas because of different community reported impacts and that kind of thing. So, so I do think there's a lot of potential there, but
I think you should strongly consider optimizing enforcement resources to better manage the traffic network. Because a lot of those negative externalities you're talking about are created by people who don't play by the rules. So something to consider in your brief outs.
Yep.
Data access. This is the one that I'm actually really love, because you were pulling down that Power BI dashboard where you had permitting, paving, right-of-way activity. Is your access to that relatively new, or is that kind of data access that you feel like you've had for some time? Because I think this commission believes there's a lot of opportunity for digital transformation and getting more value and productivity out of county staff by using county data to drive your operations more effectively?
So it's a little bit of both things if I'm hearing you right, in that I think we are evolving every day in terms of what the quality of our data sets and the availability of them for others to use across groups. And so there are data sets that we still wish existed but don't. Right. But if they did, and if someone were managing them and produced them and then kept them up, we could incorporate them in. So there's that piece. But there's also just the general, do staff end up with an opportunity to R&D on something? And a lot of times staff are just barely making it through the day. Right. And what this project has given us as an opportunity is the direction, time, and purpose to create an interface that starts to merge some of these data sets in a really productive way. And we think that it's a good learning experience internally for all of the staff that are involved. It's a good insight into next opportunities, because for every piece of data we wish we could put into it that we don't have today, it's a way for me to have a conversation with my leadership on how that should be a data set. And it doesn't exist today. And how can we bring resources to that team to have it and to be able to maintain it? So it goes like that.
I think it would be a very valuable thing for the public to know how much value that merging of data and the ability to plan and not have sensors ripped up the next day because you're not doing the parking data right. How much value you think that brought in terms of project execution as well as productivity of staff? Because I think it's difficult. You can say digital transformation all you want, but it's difficult to to fund it in tough budget times when you can't understand what the value proposition is in dollars and cents. So
Yes, very important.
That's a really good question. And I think creating a value for that is no small feat. Because to be perfectly frank with you, this roadwork that was just done at CBS Corner that some of you guys might have seen, it was like a protected bike lane, a little bob. We totally put 3 sensors into those parking spaces before they did that. So we've already had our experience with who didn't tell us about this project, and we looked, and I've done this MOT, so some of this is very manual.
Sure.
Because we don't have a digital database of MOTs, maintenance of traffic plans for projects. And so it was like 2 screens and a big screen and looking at plans and looking at our dashboard and looking and pulling sensors out of the schedule. And here, we didn't see it in time.
Yeah.
But that would be an example that I could quantify and go figure out what it's going to take us to reinstall them and then be like, okay, if we had an MOT data set that is digitized and integrated and always just in there, that could have prevented X additional costs. So the problem is putting dollar signs on it.
Totally get that. And I was thinking more of a qualitative assessment.
Yeah.
That's all I got. Frank, you got anything?
I don't have anything more. Obviously, this has been very informative, and we really appreciate you coming to present to us.
Thank you so much for your questions are wonderful, and I have several follow-ups and several important notes to consider working through it. This is a continuing conversation, so we will be back through a cycle of this kind of engagement really leading up to the board action in the fall. So that'll be like when we have existing conditions data, when we're about to ask the board for privileges, and we'll be talking to you and others at that time to make sure we're on the right track. And it's another 2 years of project after that. So it's both exciting now and exciting that we have all this time to work with. So thank you very much.
So
Thanks
how
for
it
coming.
runs from
Thank
when to when?
Thank you.
It's from, it'll run roughly an additional 2 calendar years after January 2024. So all of 2024 and pretty much all of 2025.
How do we track to make sure that we get the board report in the time before it happens?
Well, I can stay in touch with Richard and just figure out what the right timing of your meeting is. Basically, this summer, I'm going to have to lay out a commission calendar for me. Like, it's everybody and it's manageable. And what I do on my side is I keep track, like the slide that you saw where I showed you everyone I talked to so far. And I'm going to go back through that list and make sure I go back to everyone there, as well as anyone else who I asked if they wanted to talk to me and they said no, and just make sure that I'm on those calendars.
Yeah, just even knowing that the staff report is coming out and that it will, when it'll be on the board, so we have an opportunity to touch back.
Yep, and it will be a 2 board meeting event because it's an ordinance change. So there will be a request to advertise meeting,
Okay.
and that'll be my first and biggest presentation. And then there'll be engagement in the month or months in between. There might be up to 2 months potentially in between to give enough time for engagement and outreach. And then there'll be a board action meeting. So I anticipate none of those meetings will happen before November. They won't likely happen before December or January board meetings. So that's the time frame we're talking about. I and others will be doing different types of engagement in I'll call it the late fall when we have that existing conditions data and we're talking to the community about the way we use pricing and the strategies that will be reflected in the board report. So whether your commission wants to meet with me in the October-November time range, or whether you want to schedule in that intervening period between the RTA and the action, it's up to you, and I'm flexible with that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you so
very
much.
Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.
Great job, Melissa.
Really excellent.
Yes. That's, we're hoping that Arlington will become smarter. This looks like another way to make Arlington smarter.
Every little bit.
We won't say smart city because it's a county.
Smart Counties Initiative.
That's no, very good. Thank you very much. Let's move on to number 5, and thank you to Andrea for drafting. We've got circulated a letter to the board on cybersecurity in light of the briefing we had last month, and the idea here really was to just make some of the points that we received from them, but to also to indicate that we're using the NIST risk management framework. But that was important. So anyhow, do you have any other?
I confess I apparently missed it, and that's too small to read. When was it sent? So I can,
Monday, the agenda and the.
oh, all right,
You got
thank
a
you.
copy?
Thank you, I'll just quick read it.
Sure. It's redlined, there's
Yeah.
redlined in black and white. So
I was trying to get rid of the red line.
Can I
My-
accept,
I've actually.
accept the change?
Accept
Oh,
changes.
okay. I was looking.
You had a
for that.
paralegal for that?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I have people do that. I have people do that.
Low blow.
An assistant. Man.
The footnote is just to
Right.
this.
Yes, that's great. And is the track, is that you?
Excuse me.
That's you. So the track that I'm reading is what's currently proposed.
Correct.
Yeah, mine weren't in red line. My changes weren't in red.
Minor change.
Right, yours are. Mine were accepted.
Can I ask what the catalyst was for this recommendation?
What's that?
Was there like an event or incident? That
Yes,
led
yeah.
to-
Our prior meeting, we had a briefing from a cybersecurity firm, and they gave us a rundown of cyber threats,
And best
practices facing municipalities. We don't, because it's an open public meeting, we don't generally talk with or ask county staff to tell us anything about what they're doing from a cyber
Right.
perspective. So we had a third party come in and talk in generalities. But it's one of our priorities to reinforce to the board that cybersecurity is critical. Don't sleep.
And
That's right.
Why did we choose the risk management framework versus the cybersecurity framework from this?
Primarily around the recommendation to have a senior accountable official authorize all of the information systems.
This is the governing body, all that stuff.
I mean, if you want to add in cybersecurity framework or
I think the cybersecurity framework assumes the NIST framework, risk management framework.
Yeah.
So
this is kind of like the
This is like really first step.
yeah. And I think there's some concern, given the federated nature of IT in the county government, that that senior authorizing step is not consistently happening, or policies aren't being consistently applied. So it's really about the consistency
And the decentralization.
Yeah, well, the consistent application of the cybersecurity framework and the risk management framework to all of the information systems.
right, and it seemed that empowerment of DTS in this field is the right way to go.
Yeah, and effectively, it's like the federal government, you have an authorizing official.
Official,
Classifies
right.
different systems, so cyber perspective, or risk management perspective.
Right.
Because they don't have that
legislative mandate.
Yeah. Right. Any other comments?
You want to move to adopt?
I think, actually, I was interested in both of your, view. Did you see anything problematic with it?
No.
No, okay.
It's,
Okay. Good.
well, my first take is always, it's your letter.
No, I know, yeah.
First take is always,
Yes,
it's your letter.
It is our letter, right, no, I know it's not your letter, but. No.
Yes. My second question was, does this cause me problems? So,
Because we also want to do no harm.
right. So it was like, is there something I need to do to respond to this? No.
I think it's.
Lovely written.
All
Yeah,
right,
I think it's great.
okay, good. I'll entertain a motion to.
I move.
approve. Second, all in favor and, I guess the motion is to send
Send a letter.
Accept it and send it.
Aye.
All right.
Jim, for the record, voted aye.
Aye, okay.
Mike?
Yeah, I said aye.
Yeah. All right, the ayes carry. That brings us to
You should ask.
6, the collaboration with Arlington Economic Development, John and Laura.
So Laura and I had the privilege of briefing the Economic Development Commission at their May meeting. I will say they meet in Arlington Economic Development's offices, and that conference room is much nicer than this one. But that being said, we kind of gave a brief overview of the legislative mandate from the legislature to address broadband in the comprehensive plan, the fact that we don't have that in our comprehensive plan currently, and our recommendation to the board to address that, to update the comprehensive plan to address that, and our recommendation and decision to try and focus on small bite-sized policy issues that we might be able to tackle as volunteers to demonstrate what portions of the comprehensive plan update might look like, and an offer of collaboration with economic development, because obviously our charter has a nexus to their activities when it comes to economic development and making sure that this is a place that information-centric businesses and employees want to locate. We threw out a couple ideas. There were some very good questions, and we do not have any formal response from EDC as of this evening about what they want to engage on, but they seem very amenable to engaging on something.
And it sounded like there was some discussion about the workforce.
It might be workforce development. There were some
Yeah.
questions around workforce development. There was some, I think they're actively doing work on workforce development, so I think it might dovetail with something that one of their subcommittees is already working on.
The director, the county staff is Arlington Economic Development, is the head of the. Yes.
Yeah.
And apparently he was very interested in that. It's my understanding. He didn't speak, but he was taking notes.
No. One of the commission members was taking notes.
But he was too, apparently. I saw Bill Dunn last night.
Oh, okay.
So, he thought, who is the chair of it? So,
yeah. So I think there's lots of, frankly, I think people were a bit surprised that IT wasn't more comprehensively addressed in our comprehensive plan already. So I think that was good knowledge sharing with our counterparts in economic development. So more to come.
I actually did see our board liaison, Libby Garvian, mention that this was going on, and she's been a big proponent of the various commissions working together, basically cross-fertilization.
I understand our ask for the digital plan to be included, but you mentioned broadband. I'm not sure what you were talking about there since.
So the statute that added the elements of the comprehensive plan to law in Virginia,
Right.
added a requirement that the comprehensive plan address the provision of broadband services, which is the hook to the comprehensive planning element recommendation.
And maybe I'm sure I'm being dense on this, but is that like the private sector, or is that assuming that there's some government funding?
It is the section of law I'm talking about is the statute that prescribes, I should say, because it's shall, it's not should, shall address, and it has a number of elements in it. And that is the law from the Commonwealth to municipalities about what their comprehensive plan shall address. And in
Yeah,
2018, they said,
That's not, yeah, that's
shall
not the
address
question.
broadband.
My question is, what assumption is that about broadband? What they're talking about broadband? Since there's the private sector broadband, and then there's this whole, what should we do about municipal broadband?
Yeah, there is nothing in it that prescribes how the municipality shall address the provision of broadband. So it doesn't it's silent on whether it should be commercial or public or utility or any other. It just says shall address the provision of broadband
Since
services.
that's like
That shall
a
be part of the
question.
planning. That shall be, broadband shall be
Yeah, since
Right.
I'm just thinking,
part of the plan.
right now, we don't have a decision on the municipal aspect of it.
Correct.
So,
Nor does our comprehensive plan address the provision of broadband at all.
right,
Did you find the definitional for broadband that flows into that code section?
I didn't look that deep.
Okay, I'm just trying to remember my own recollection.
I'm interested, that's what I'm.
Yeah, my recollection is that the definition for broadband inserted in the Code of Virginia for these types of sections is about internet access. Right. It's not about whether it's for-profit, not-for-profit, municipal, or private. It's
Or speed.
Right, it's
required.
kind of
I don't
like
think
the
there was right.
I think it's like a definition like water, right? It's like water is clean water, is clean water, right? So I think it's the basic, like you're saying, it's just
access to
we
the
shall talk about internet,
Yeah.
but how is not addressed.
Correct.
But it's worth some more research just in case.
Yeah.
I just
like
don't want us to slide into some notion that we have to have municipal internet because of that.
Sure.
That, yeah,
And
that.
we have that report.
We do.
Actually,
That's the next
item
agenda item.
7.
Any other questions
Item
on
for
the EDC?
Not good work, both of you. I look forward to working with economic development. That brings us to the Broadband Resource Evaluation and Needs Assessment Report, which I did circulate the email, which included the links to the report and the slide deck with it. And I did actually take a look at all 132 pages of it. It's if you've got a little light reading you want, or if you have problems with insomnia.
What's the
There is a,
You said that out way for?
I sent that actually in the beginning of May, I think it was early May.
Yes.
And what is our time
It
frame?
was May 1.
Okay, that is very early.
Can't get much
Sure,
earlier.
okay. So I suggested that we take it up at the June meeting. I've requested that Richard invite a staff presentation
Yes,
on that.
I'm working on that.
Yeah, do you think that's like we're likely to get something?
I am not 100% there yet, but close.
Okay, good. And it looks like actually Holly might be part of it.
I've asked
too, right?
both of them.
Okay, good. Okay,
I asked
What
Holly
would be
and-
our remit with respect to the county?
at this point, I think we just want the presentation, and then I think we wanted to talk about it tonight, but I think we'll get the presentation, and I think we'll talk about next steps for us.
Yeah, I mean,
Because they've actually got 2 more steps. This is just phase 1.
Yeah, this is clearly going to be a topic of great discussion in the county, and we're sure that the board is going to want our opinion and advice in our function as an advisory commission on it. And so we thought we would do some due diligence, make sure that we get the briefing from the report, have the public have the benefit of the staff briefing of the report and the report opportunity to make public comment. And then we might come back to discuss it and have any follow-up questions from it, and discuss it again in July and perhaps formulate a draft of an opinion, including potential soliciting for public comment in July after the report's out there and briefed. So that's kind of what we were thinking about in terms of an order of
This
operations.
is a major lift, but there's a lot of time.
Yeah, so we were thinking June, you get the report, we ask questions, we have a chance for follow-up, we can take public comment and brief out the follow-up in July, have a conversation amongst the commission in July, primarily in, amongst ourselves, and then draft an opinion for adoption. We skip August by September.
Does the board have any schedule of what steps they need to take in response to receiving this?
I'm unaware, because unlike Frank, I haven't read the report.
Just writing a note myself. Read report.
Read report.
I'll forget.
The slide deck's only, I think, 15 pages. So yeah. And there's actually good some. There is the
Report to the
4-page.
manager, though, right?
What's that?
It's a report to the manager, not the board. Yes?
I think it's.
It was a contract
I don't know.
that the board let, anyway, I would like to know more about
Right.
what the governance steps are.
So in
for
your
reviewing.
questions in advance of the June budget, include one. What's the roadmap?
Yeah.
Like, what are your key dates and milestones? I know they've got a better idea now.
Right, and I
Someone
think-
asked.
And I think it was mentioned at the budget work session that I think phase 2 might be coming out this summer. I think that right. It seemed to be the time
But-
frame.
Most of our reports are running a little bit slower
Slower.
than we would like.
Right.
Availability of consulting hours and such, so I want to make sure they give you the most recent timeline.
Okay, yes, sure, that would be helpful. So anyhow,
That's why we wanted it on the agenda tonight. Highlight
just
it for
to cue
everybody.
it up so everybody will have read
Ready to
it.
go?
So many of these things coming up in the fall,
Yeah.
and I'm concerned about the timing.
But
What other
generally,
things
all
are-
reports go to that we produce, go to the county manager.
Man,
That was my thinking,
Yeah,
that the
that's who
manager,
we work for. We
that the
work-
first thing would be that the manager would have a recommendation to
Yes.
the board.
Yes.
And so that's gonna take some time, and I would think in our planning, that's, before we do anything, we wanna know what the manager is recommending.
Well, I think we gotta get our heads around it.
right,
Yeah.
and yeah,
And
we
that'll
gotta
take
move in,
probably a couple
in parallel, I think.
Yeah.
Just on principle, I was.
Yeah.
So anyhow, so we've got some work to do coming up. And yeah, as soon as you got information.
Yep.
And let's see, I guess that brings us, anything else on that? But
We look for it in May.
yeah, it was May 1st that I sent it. And there's actually links to it
remember.
all on I think there's a broadband report webpage on the county's site. And
It
it
was
has
from you.
links to all that there.
It
Yeah.
was from you.
So,
I remember it, I just didn't have time to look at it.
that brings us to legislative update. The FCC, Federal Communications Commission, has a new nominee for the 5th and final spot on the commission. Anna Gomez, currently at the State Department, involved in international telecom, and previously at the FCC and NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications and Information Administration at the Commerce Department. And before that, she actually worked in the Clinton White House, and she was in private law practice. She was nominated for the final vacancy, which would give the Democrats a 3-2 advantage. Current FCC commissioners Brendan Carr, a Republican, and Jeffrey Starks, a Democrat, have been nominated for new terms. So we could get to a full commission, which, given the current 2-2 deadlock, Gomez's confirmation could lead to restoration of net neutrality rules. I'm sure she will be ruled on that at her confirmation hearing. And so that may, even though so far her nomination does not appear to be controversial as was the prior nominee, Gigi Sones was, who wound up having her she asked that her nomination be withdrawn given the controversy. Work is underway to explore use cases for future 6G wireless networks, a new potential standard. Creative spectrum sharing in the bands between 7 and 20 gigahertz. think it's the centimetric, or centimeter, that's the size of the band. Between 7 and 20 gigahertz will be critical to the rollout of this future standardized advanced wireless next generation platform. Sharing will be necessary because moving incumbent users in those bands is becoming too complicated and expensive. The white, more to come on 6G. I think they're still working on the use cases for 5G. So, the White House National Cybersecurity Strategy implementation plan should be out this summer and is expected to include a nationwide effort to give all Americans foundational cyber skills and growing the national cyber workforce, including the federal government. On May 11th, the FCC ordered voice service providers to block and cease accepting traffic from international gateway provider One Eye, who's been found to be facilitating illegal robocall campaigns. The FCC at the same time reports that a 99% drop in auto warranty scam robocalls and 88% month-to-month drop in student loan scam robocalls after its enforcement actions. Colorado recently passed a law to make it easier for its local governments to provide broadband service either on their own or by partnering with industry service providers. The new law will also make it easier for municipalities in Colorado to participate in federal broadband programs. Chi-Chi Sung, who I mentioned earlier, the withdrawn FCC nominee, has been named executive director of the American Association of Public Broadband, a nonprofit formed by state and local broadband officials with the mission of advocating for municipal broadband. Harbor Peak Network Solutions has broken ground on a new middle mile fiber system to numerous interconnect numerous public and private data centers throughout the Ashburn, Virginia data center alley. Harbor Peak's network will interconnect to the two Harbor Links 60-mile conduit built along I-95 between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. An NTIA-backed report claims spectrum sharing in the 3.5 gigahertz CBRS band is working, despite some industry concerns. CTIA, the Wireless Carrier Industry Association, maintains that CBRS is underused and is more costly to serve large areas because of the low power levels authorized. Cord cutters and cord nevers, pay TV subscribers, the majority in the second half of 2022, for the first time, cable and satellite TV satellite and cable TV subscribers logged in at 48%, so below that 50%. So streaming is now the primary way many Americans consume video content. So that's all I've got to report.
I love that you do this by hand.
There's a methodology there. Very analog, but it's got some digital aspects.
I'm totally with you on that analog method.
DTS update, Norrin, Richard?
Only thing that passes is that we did do the tabletop exercise with the county board. Cybersecurity was well received.
Good.
Very well.
Very good. Here. April meeting minutes are in the works, but rehab issue with getting the video, so hopefully we'll have that soon.
They're actually complete except for the amendment thing, the checking
Just
and
make sure.
associating names with something.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the efforts. We'll get them there eventually. So we don't have to consider them tonight. Good of the order. Anything else?
I actually do have something.
Okay.
Last week, I was at a presentation that concerned the Federal Communications Commission's information collection that they do with regard to network outages. It has primarily to do with 911 outages.
This was the FCBA?
Yes.
Yes, okay. You're a better man than I.
It involves, essentially 911 call outages as well as disaster information reporting requirements. Heretofore, that's information that the Commission has always collected, but was really proprietary. They did not release it, but they have initiative now, which I believe is primarily at the state level, so it may not filter down to the county level. But my understanding from the presentation is that this information, which can be very timely in terms of disaster information planning and network planning, can be made available to the states, perhaps further down, but the state or jurisdiction has to reach out to the commission to make that case, because otherwise it is privileged information. It's not clear to me how well known that is, but I wanted to make that as a matter of record. Perhaps Nora and Richard, through your connections, you can pass word to make sure the state is aware of that. And I'd be curious to know if they are aware of it. And I think it's a good source of information. So you may want to take advantage of it.
Right, yeah. Because we did have that outage, so.
Yes.
So it should have been reported, I think, through this system.
Yeah. Well, my last day at the commission, I worked at the Public Safety and Homeland Security Bureau. And every morning we had the meetings where we got the live real-time outage reports. So we went through this, but this was non-public information. So when these outages occurred that you were talking about, we would have the information instantly, because under the commission rules, for example, the carriers would have to report something like within 30 minutes or so discovering it.
And from a FEMA perspective, we collected that for the daily president's report during disasters. And the problem was that we had to individually collect it from each of the private sector companies and aggregate them. That was one of the things.
Well, now the FCC has a separate reporting system, DIRS, I think it is, DIRS, which is the
Disaster Information Reporting System, DIRS. The one that is more for the 911 calls is NORS, is the Network Outage Reporting System.
One of the things I was doing in the ECC was
DIRS and NORS.
NRCC was aggregated.
But DIRS is, I think, primarily concerned with wireless networks and broadcasters.
Yes, well,
broadcasters.
All of those, we had to go to the tables of each of the major vendors, basically.
And part of the dynamic
accumulated, because it's all private, non-disclosable information. Proprietary. It was all proprietary.
And that's why it is a significant piece of information now to know that it is at the state level, that information, it's not the raw data, it's basically anonymized, so that there is
really important for regional.
Right. There's some important statistical information that's very timely that the state should be aware that is available, and then they can inquire as to how far down that can go in governmental change. But they should be aware of this.
Right.
And Public Safety Homeland Security Bureau is the contact area at the commission for this.
Right, I think for both systems.
That's correct. It was the same branch. We handled the same thing. It was a cybersecurity and communications reliability division.
Right. Although I think the Media Bureau is also involved in DIRS as far as
that's right.
Giving the order.
Can I request that you send us a link to? There's a lot of federal acronyms.
Right.
I can find
out.
Okay.
Thank you. If you can find us like something we can take to our Commonwealth partners.
I'll be glad.
This.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate it.
It was the FCBA then.
That's
a federal communications bar, so all our telecom attorneys.
Gotcha.
You're still a member?
Yes, I am.
I am as well. Bunch of retired guys.
FCBA, Federal Communications Bar Association.
Me three.
Association.
But there's a different acronym for the system that's now available, or the system of record for the information.
NORS, Network Outage Reporting System, and DIRS, DIRS, Disaster Information Reporting System.
That's been around, that one has been around for a few years.
Oh, they've both been around for some time. And Frank is right, the DIRS is like more of the broadcasters, NORS is more like
I think also,
but
also wireless networks too.
Yes. DIRS, Disaster Information.
All right, any other business? Otherwise, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Second? All in favor? Ayes carried. We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Meeting tonight. It was excellent. Little free baseball here tonight.